So, more or less, you guys are coming. I'm sorry, I had my procedure was a bit late, and that's why I will try to make this quick. Would you want a copy of the slides? Yes! I'll give you a copy of the slides. I will give it to your class president. Would that be okay? Can you hear my voice at the very back? Yes! Okay. So, we will try to end before 12. So, the main source of this lecture is dates. So, I presume most of you have read cardio already? Okay. So, this is a very condensed topic for your cardio. I tried to include all the important or salient points in the lecture, but I would still encourage for you guys to read the book, especially for the clinical correlates. Okay, so if you guys want to go to the bathroom after or during the lecture, it's fine with me. You can go out. I don't mind if you eat during the lecture, it's fine with me also. Just make sure you sign the attendance that's being passed along. Anyway, so let's start so that you can have your break. So, good morning. I'm Dr. Maxine Salon. I'm a gastroenterologist. I'm also an internist. This is my first lecture here in Southwestern. So I just joined the not my first lecture also in BD. So I also, we don't have lectures in CIM, but I also handle the BD in CIM. So this morning I'm tasked to give the lecture on your cardiovascular system. So can you see that? Or do you want me to share the slides now so you can make notes? Yes. See, I will airdrop it to somebody and then okay, diba? I'll airdrop it to someone and then kamu na line up of you. Cardiovascular system. So first we will touch with the anatomy and the physiology of the cardiovascular system. So as you see, the heart is mainly formed by the right ventricle and the anterior surface of the heart. So the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery create a wedge-like structure and is slightly noted at the left of the sternum. Okay? So the inferior border of the right ventricle lies below the junction of the sternum and the xiphoid process. So, as you know, the right ventricle narrows superiorly and it connects to the pulmonary artery. So, what's important here is the sternal angle of the sternal angle of Lewy, or also called the base of the heart, and it is located at the right and left second intercostal space. So, you have to remember this space because that will later on play an important role, especially when you measure the JVP. Okay, so the left ventricle lies behind the right ventricle and it is to the left, forming the left lateral margin of the heart. So the inferior tip of the left ventricle is the cardiac apex, which produces the apical impulse or the point of maximal impulse. So the BMI is typically located at the fifth intercostal space, and it's important to note that it is medial to the left midclavicular line. So if it's on the lateral side, that's a sign of left ventricular hypertrophy. Okay, so it should be medial. So the BMI is not always palpable. So even in healthy individuals, you might not necessarily palpate it. So in a supine patient, the BMI diameter is usually 1 to 2.5 centimeter. Now, if it's larger, so if you have a BMI of, let's say, more than 3, that's already a sign of left ventricular hypertrophy. So in patients with COPD, the most prominent impulse may shift to the xiphoid or epigastric area due to the right ventricular hypertrophy. So, as you know, the pulmonary artery bifurcates early into the right and left, and then the aorta ascends from the left ventricle and to the sternal angle, then arches posteriorly to the left. So the superior and inferior vena cava return venous blood from the upper and lower body to the right atrium. So important to the heart is the anatomy because it's quite very closely related to the physiology. Now, you had your BP measurement a week ago, no? So you more or less know how to get the BP. So just for quick bullet points, so you have to make sure that the patient rests for 5 minutes, ensure that the feet is flat on the floor, back is supported, arm is bare, free of clothes. So it should be always at the arm, the position should be at the arm at the heart level, and the patient should be quietly or well seated, no, and relaxed. So at the heart level, so that should be at the fourth intercostal space at the sternum, and that you have to use the correct size of the cuff, because if you use inappropriate size of the cuff, that will cause slight variations in your blood pressure. So you have to inflate it to 30 mmHg above the pulse disappearance when you do your palpatory blood pressure. And then you have to deflate it slowly, so the first 2 heart sounds that you can hear, that would be the first at least 2 consecutive beats, that's your systolic, and then once it disappears, that will be your diastolic blood pressure. So I presume all of you know how to get the heart rate already and palpate the pulse, so I don't think I need to focus on this further. Now for the jugular venous pressure, so your JVP or your jugular vein reflects the right atrial pressure or the central venous pressure. So it's a key indicator of your volume status and your cardiac function. So it is best assessed based or from the right internal jugular vein. It's internal, not external, which is in direct line with the SVC and the right atrium. So your internal jugular vein lies deep into the sternocleidomastoid, and it is not directly visible. So you have to do certain maneuvers for it to know, for you to measure the JVP. So the external jugular vein can also be used, but it is less reliable due to the anatomical variations and surface obstructions. So this is just the waveforms and the clinical clues which help you in determining your JVP. So JVP shows fluctuation due to the right atrial filling, contraction, and emptying. So it has different waveforms, it has different pressures. So the dominant JVP movement is inward, coinciding with the X descent. So if you do your ECG or your waveform at the sonography, you would know that. But that's beyond the point, so for you guys right now. So the carotid pulse is outward, so it's important to differentiate it from your JVP. So as mentioned, what's the use of your JVP? It helps assess your volume status. So if you are dehydrated, your JVP might be lower. Right and left ventricular function. So if you have vascular ventricular dysfunction, your JVP will also be varied. Your tricuspid or pulmonary valve diseases, pericardial diseases such as your tamponade, cardiac tamponade, and arrhythmia. So this will vary. So your JVP, an increase in your jugular venous pressure increases with heart failure, pulmonary hypertension, tricuspid stenosis, atrioventricular dissociation, and tamponade. But as mentioned, your JVP will decrease if you have hypovolemia or decreased venous tone. So how do you measure your JVP? So you have to identify the highest point of oscillation with the internal jugular vein or the point above the external jugular vein collapses. So you have to measure the vertical height above the sternal angle of Louis. So that's usually more than 5 centimeters above the right atrium. So the JVP of more than 3 to 4 above the sternal angle of Louis suggests elevated right atrial pressure. So this is how you monitor or measure your JVP. So I think this is lifted from weights. So as you can see in position A, the JVP is, the head of the bed is lower at 30-degree angle. So you cannot properly see the pulsations of your jugular venous pressure. At 60-degree angle, the head of the bed, so the internal jugular vein can now be easily visible. So the distance from the sternal angle or the right atrium can now be measured. So in this diagram, what you have to remember is B. Okay, 60 degrees, So JVP measurement of more than 3 cm above the sternal angle of Louis or more than 8 cm above the right atrium is considered elevated. Okay, so far no questions. Okay, so this is how you measure your JVP. So when you go to the clinics, you have to get your rulers because that is essential. So you have to make the patient comfortable, and then you have to raise the head of the bed slightly to relax the sternocleidomastoid. Then you raise the head of the bed to approximately about 30 degrees or 60 degrees. You have to adjust that accordingly. Then you have to ask the patient to turn to the left side so that the right side of the sternocleidomastoid area can be exposed. Once you see the pulsation, you would know that there's a pulsation. Once you see that, you measure it using your ruler. So you put a perpendicular ruler at the sternal angle. You know where the sternal angle of your vein is, right? Okay. So once you go to the clinics or once you do your cardio examination, and let you palpate where's the dip, because there is usually depression there. That's like an intercostal space. So that's where you put the ruler, and then you measure it. So if it's more than 5, so if it's more than the value, so that means that it's elevated. Okay? So you just read this, it's in beans, and you can internalize it. So JVP, it's not reliable in children, and it is, aside from it's a useful diagnostic tool, its role as a prognosticator tool in your heart failure is unclear. So blood pressure readings vary by arm position, so you have to remember that. So if you place the arm above, so that will cause your BP to be lower, but if you lower your arm, that will cause the BP to be higher. And that important take-home points is that home and ambulatory BP monitoring is more accurate than your clinic readings, because some patients will be anxious when you do your BP monitoring at home, at the clinic. So you advise the patient to have ambulatory or home BP monitorings. Now for the carotid pulse, so this evaluates your cardiac function, especially aortic stenosis and regurgitation. So you have to assess the following: the upstroke, the amplitude, the contour, the variation, and the thrills. So you have to remember, since the carotid pulse, it's an arterial pulse, so the upstroke should always follow the S1. Okay, and it should be precede S2. So the carotid, the amplitude always correlates reasonably well with the pulse pressure, and you have to identify the contour, but this is more or less not really applicable to you guys yet, but it's good to know. So this is how you measure your carotid pulse. So you know this is the pulse that you palpate when you're doing resuscitations. So it's the biggest pulse. You can easily palpate that one. So you have to position the patient in a supine position with the head of the bed elevated at 30 degrees. You have to inspect the pulsations medial to the sternocleidomastoid. So I assume some of you are checking if you have a carotid pulse right now. So whatever you palpate, that's your carotid pulse. What's important though is you do not try to palpate both carotid pulses when you're assessing the patient, because that will essentially obliterate blood supply to your brain. So that might cause syncope. Okay, so when you assess the carotid pulse, when you go to the clinics, please use one side. So you use the index or middle finger or the thumb, and you palpate one side at a time. Then, so you do not or you avoid massaging your carotid sinus. So above the pulse, there's a sinus there. So do not massage that one. That can cause arrhythmia. Okay? Or when you have arrhythmia, you massage that one. That can obliterate it. Okay? It's a nice to know. So pulses alternate. So this is regular rhythm. It's a type of a waveform for your pulse with alternating strong and weak pulses. It's an amplitude. So it indicates severe left ventricular dysfunction. So as I mentioned earlier, your pulses should be regular. It should be of the same amplitude. It should have the same upstroke. So when you have like an alternating, sige, you try palpating your pulse. So it should be regular. Okay? If it's irregular, if it's strong, then it becomes weak, strong, and then weak alternates. That's pulsus alternans. That's abnormal. Okay? So it's best felt with light pressure on the radial or femoral artery, and it's confirmed with a BP cough. So you inflate above the systolic and slowly deflate. Then you feel the strong beats. That's heard first. So as the pressure drops, the weaker beats appear, then disappear, causing the coronary sound to double. Okay? It should supposedly be normal and regular. Now, carotid artery thrills and bruits. So your thrill, so it's a vibration and felt over the carotid artery, similar to a cat spur. So it may indicate a turbulent flow from a significant stenosis or transmitted to an aortic valve stenosis. So when I think of this, you think of a lumen, or let's say a tube or a hose, no? It's barado, there's flax there. So of course, when the lumen is not soft, there is always problem with the flow of, let's say, water, so it will cause disturbance. No? So when you think of that, in a patient with, let's say, atherosclerosis, that will cause thrills. Or with problems, let's say, stenosis, na yung block, so mag-thrill na siya. So it does usually really sound like a cat spur. May magtingo when you listen to the carotid artery. A bruit is more of like a murmur, and it's a sound like a turbulent arterial blood flow also. So during auscultation, the technique that you do here is you ask the patient to hold her or his breath for 15 seconds. Use the diaphragm of the stethoscope, not the bell. And then you listen at the upper thyroid cartilage. And then over the carotid bifurcation. So the bell may be used to detect the lower frequency sounds in higher grade stenosis. So you have different causes of bruits as mentioned. So one is atherosclerotic stenosis. Other causes, malformations of your arteries, such as your tortuous carotid artery, external carotid artery disease, aortic stenosis, hyperthyroidism, or thoracic outlet syndrome. For brachial artery, so you assess the brachial artery use when you think that the carotid artery is obstructed, king thorax thrill. So the technique, you just position the arm, you extend the elbow, palm up, and then you support the arm by cupping under the elbow, holding the forearm, and then adjust the elbow flexion to optimize muscle relaxation, and you can palpate further the brachial pulse. So you use again the index and middle finger. It's usually located medial to the tight biceps tendon. Now we go to the interesting part, because the first part is more or less that's understandable, the pulses. So when examining the heart, this is quite essential, especially for clerks or future doctors. You have to know the heart and you have to know what's normal, because you cannot identify what's abnormal if you don't know what's normal. So when positioning the patient, when you're assessing the cardiovascular system, the examiner should always stand on the right side of the patient. So if you have a patient left lateral decubitus position. So instead of supine or flat, turn to the left side. Then using your two fingers, you palpate at the fifth. See, who can tell me where the PMI is best palpated? At the midpoint. Okay, so you're right, it's in the midclavicular line. It's supposed to be on the left, not on the right. You don't have a heart on the right side. So left side, midclavicular, fifth intercostal space. Okay, and should be a bit medial, not lateral. So once you feel that, you palpate and you assess. Okay? That's where you feel for the PMI and you listen. So to assess left ventricular outflow obstruction and aortic regurgitation, you have to ask the patient to sit up, lean forward, and exhale. So that's a maneuver that can actually improve your assessment of your heart sounds. So this is just the sequence of cardiac examination. I won't be going through each sequence na. Okay, I gave you the slide, so you can just read it on your own. But safe to say, you have to start with the patient in a supine, with the head slightly elevated at 30 degrees. Then you have the patient turn to the left lateral decubitus. Then you can do the supine again with the head elevated or sitting forward. So locations of cardiac findings. So it's important to identify the anatomic location because different valves, different problems of the heart can be localized to a particular location of the heart. No? So you have to identify the intercostal spaces. So the heart usually occupies the second to the fifth intercostal space. Anything beyond that is abnormal. Okay? So you have to measure the distance of the PMI from the midclavicular or mid-sternal line, as I mentioned. So what's normal is it should be always medial. It should not be lateral to the midclavicular line. If it's lateral, the heart is enlarged. So in terms of timing of the impulses, sounds, and murmurs, you have to auscultate. This is also done after you do the inspection and palpation. So we will go through that later. So you have to recognize that there are two sounds that are distinct to the heart. So you have your S1, which is the systole, and S2, which is the diastole. So S1, that is produced by what man? Closure of which valve? Okay. Sige, learning issue, what valves are closed during S1 and S2. So, intensity of S1 is loudest at the apex, and intensity of S2 is louder at the base. So you can use your inching technique. You slowly move the bell or the diaphragm of your stethoscope to hear clearly the heart sounds. But you have tried na listening to your own heart sound, you're pursuing. Okay? So you know what an S1 sounds like. Okay, loud. So it's really loud. Okay, sakto na. So just remember that one. So a technique there is just repeat in your head, loud, 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 loud. So anything loud, S1. Anything loud is S2. Beyond the loud and loud, that's abnormal. Okay? Originally, you remember. So the palpation will aid. So what this means is that to help you identify which one is S1 and S2, you can simultaneously auscultate the heart and palpate the carotid artery. So as you mentioned earlier, when you feel the pulse, that should coincide with S1. Okay? So later on, when you go home, you listen to your heart sound, then simultaneously palpate the carotid artery. But the carotid pulsates and the heart sound that coincides with that, that's S1. Okay? Sounds, murmurs coinciding with upstroke is systolic. Sounds, murmurs that coincides after that upstroke is a diastolic heart sound. So in terms of inspection, so as mentioned earlier, this diagram will tell you what part of the heart is occupied. So as I mentioned, it's second to more or less a fifth intercostal space. You have the right, the aortic area, left will be your pulmonic. Then you have the left lateral sternal border, which coincides with your right ventricular area. Then your left ventricular area is represented by your apex. So when you palpate, you use the ball of your hands or the finger pads of your second and third digit. So use the palm or the flat of the finger pads on the chest. Okay? If you are palpating a bigger part, you use this one. This is the ball of your hands. So when you feel for a thrill, for example, when you go to the clinics, you see a heart that's dynamic, nag-heave yun siya. You can palpate that using the ball of your hands. If you're palpating for the pulses, you use the second and the third index finger. So this two, okay? So usually, you enlarge right and left ventricle or atrium can cause some changes with heaves or lifts. So you know it's really abnormal. You know that cartoon character where the heart is like coming out? That's abnormal. So that's what you call heaves or lifts, okay? So for thrills, you press the ball of your hand firmly on the chest. You can feel buzzing or vibratory sensations from turbulent blood flow. So that's a thrill. So if the thrill is found, you have to auscultate the same area of your murmurs. So remember, thrills and heaves, these are palpatory findings. Murmurs are auscultatory findings, okay? So when you palpate, you start at the right, you check for the right ventricular impulses. You palpate at the lower left sternal border, and then the xiphoid area. For your S1 and S2, use firm pressures within the right hand of the chest, and then with the left index and middle finger, you palpate for the carotid upstroke to identify S1 just before the carotid upstroke and S2 after. So S3 and S4, you have to use light pressures at the cardiac apex. You listen or you feel for it if you can. And then, so this is what you do, no? So this is lifted again from base. As mentioned, you have to ask the patient to move to the left lateral or assume a left lateral decubitus position. Then you palpate. So the BMI more or less near the siya sa nipple. So that's up to you. So for males, the BMI is more or less close to the nipple. But you can't palpate the BMI on all patients. Some patients that are very big or females, it's hard to palpate for their BMI. So again, location, this was mentioned already, where you can feel it. The diameter is usually less than 2.5 centimeter and usually occupies one interspace. So it may feel larger when you assume the left lateral decubitus position. So the amplitude, as mentioned, it's brisk and tapping or diffuse or sustained, and that the duration, so it's a prolonged duration of your BMI, is usually indicative of left ventricular hypertrophy. So just read through that. In terms of the right ventricular area, so the left lateral sternal border, the third and fourth and fifth interspace, you ask the patient to lie supine with the head elevated. So when you're measuring for the BMI, left lateral, after you have done assessing the BMI, supine, okay? Third, fourth, and fifth. So ask the patient to exhale and hold the breath briefly. You palpate with the curved fingers in the left, third, fourth, and fifth interspaces. You assess for the rotation, the amplitude, and the duration. Then sometimes the systolic right-sided S3, S4 are palpable on the left, fourth, and fifth interspaces. But do not bother yourself with that one. Okay, it's not really that important. So for the right ventricles, it's increased in AP diameter. So you ask the patient to inhale and exhale, and then palpate the right side of the ventricle. So as mentioned, so from starting the BMI, you check the second, third, and fourth, and then go to the epigastric or subxiphoid area to check for the right ventricle. Okay. Then you ask the patient to take a deep breath again and assess. So for the pulmonic area, this is on the left second interspace. So this overlies the pulmonary artery, and ask the patient to hold his breath. So you inspect and aortic outflow tract. So you have to palpate for pulsations and multiple heart sounds. So in terms of percussion, it's not really that done anymore for the heart. It can be used if you really are thinking of left ventricular hypertrophy, or you're considering there are other problems, cardiac size, for example, that you have to assess. But it's not usually done anymore. No? So palpation has essentially or more or less replaced percussion. So this is the area, or this is a summary of the area that I was talking about earlier. So for the aortic area, so if you're thinking of, like, let's say, aortic stenosis, aortic regurgitation, you hear that best on the second right interspace. If you're thinking of a murmur from a pulmonary stenosis, you hear that best on the second left interspace, pulmonic area, okay? Then the apex would signify mitral area. So if you hear murmurs near the nipple line, so that's most likely a mitral murmur, mitral regurgitation, mitral stenosis. If it's on the lower left sternal border, then that's a tricuspid area. So if there's anything that you have to remember from this lecture, it's this particular slide. Okay, that will help you identify later on what's the murmur, where is it located. Okay? So when you perform an auscultation later, when you go home, so you auscultate in a quiet room with the patient's head and the upper chest elevated at 30 degrees. Then use both the diaphragm first, so that's the bigger portion of your stethoscope or the bell. Then you start either at the apex, so the middle or the nipple line, then you move to the base. So apex to base method, so you begin at the BMI. Then you move medially to the left lateral sternal border. So you start here, then you move up, okay? So that's what you mean. So from here, you move up until here. So you ascend to the left intercostal space, then cross to the right intercostal space. That way, you will not miss out any valvular problems. So you cover at least 6 key listening points. So why is this important? This particular area will help you listen for heart abnormalities. I would suggest if you listen to S1, it would be better at the apex. Okay? Then use incremental movements, or what you call inching. So you slowly cover the area with your stethoscope. Based on apex method, so some people would start at their second right intercostal space, then they move down. So that's also fine. Whatever works for you, what's important is you cover the whole area. So there are important maneuvers also. No? So there are certain maneuvers that will help you identify a murmur further. So for example, this figure, the first figure on your right or left. So for mitral stenosis, you ask the patient to roll on the left lateral decubitus position, which brings the left ventricle closer to the chest wall, and then you place the bell of your stethoscope lightly on near the nipple line. Diba, I said mitral valvular problems, mitral stenosis, mitral regurg, you hear that best here at the BMI area, and that's the area of your mitral area. That's why that will be accentuated more when you turn to the left side. Now, for aortic regurgitation, where is the aortic area located? Second intercostal space, where man? Left, right? Right, okay. So you ask the patient to sit up and lean forward. So you can see in the diagram, diba? So that brings the valvular or the valvular area closer, so you can hear it better. So you press the diaphragm of your stethoscope on the chest, and you listen along the left sternal border and at the apex, pausing periodically so the patient may breathe. So how do you identify systolic and diastolic? So as I mentioned earlier, you palpate for the right carotid artery. It's so hard when you do not have a stethoscope. This will make sense if you do your clinics later on. But what you do is when you listen to the heart, I suggest you put it at the 5th intercostal space at the BMI area. And then while you're simultaneously pressing, you palpate the carotid. If the heart sound coincides with the carotid pulsation, most patients have murmurs. So, love na parang varied sounds before mag-dub. Sometimes you cannot even hear the dub. So, the technique there is you feel for the carotid pulse and listen. So, if you hear a hard sound that coincides with the upstroke of your carotid pulse, most likely that's S1. So, S1, again, occurs just before the carotid upstroke. S2 follows the carotid upstroke. So, as you can see at the base, so this is important, at the base, S2 is louder than S1. But S2 may split with respiration, okay? At the apex, S1 is usually louder. That's why I asked earlier what hard sounds, or what valves will close when you have S1. Mitral and the split, very good. So, una, you can remember, you will not forget that anymore. So when you listen to the apex, it's mitral or tricuspid. So at the base, what will you hear at the base, or what's responsible for S2? Aortic and pulmonic valves, no? So so you carefully compare S1 and S2. So confirm each hard sound. Identify if it's systole or if it's diastole. So this one, I want you to read this carefully, okay? Because it's so hard to teach you hard sounds if you cannot, you haven't internalized the concepts yet. Because at this point in your training, it's important to identify S1 and S2 first. Because you cannot appreciate the splitting of the hard sounds, extra S1s, extra S2, or further other murmurs if you do not get the basic S1 and S2. Okay? Just read through this and then analyze, and then later on when we go to the clinics, you will hopefully appreciate it better. So, tips for identifying hard murmurs. So, you've done your inspection. So, at this point, once you go to the clinic, you first inspect the heart. So, ideally, you have to remove any clothes for the patient, assess, inspect. So, are there scars? Are there abnormal pulsations that you can see? Then you check for thrills, heaps, and then you assess if where's the BMI after palpation, no? But after that, you have to auscultate. Then after you auscultate, listen if S1 or S2. However, sometimes most patients will have extra hard sounds, so they have hard murmurs. So first, when you hear an extra hard sound, you have to time the murmur. How long does it last? Does it last beyond the systole? Does it extend to the diastole? Or just between the systole and before diastole? So what is its duration? So after you identify the duration or the time of the murmur, you locate where the murmur is best heard. Is it best heard at the base or at the apex, the left sternal border? So once you identify where you hear it best, it will give you a clue on what valve is the problem. Then you conduct the necessary maneuvers, the left lateral decubitals or sitting. I mentioned if the murmur will be more prominent, if you ask the patient to sit up and lean forward, that's most likely an aortic murmur. If it's on the left lateral decubitus so you can hear it further or better, most likely it's a mitral problem. So you determine the shape of the murmur. So for example, is it crescendo or decrescendo? You grade the intensity of the murmur from 1 to 6. And then you identify the features associated with the murmur. So this is what I mean. So the systolic murmur, it's usually at S1. And then it happens between S1 and S2, you hear a murmur. That's a mid-systolic murmur. Okay? If the murmur, you can hear it from S1 until S2, that's a pan-systolic murmur. Okay? And then if you can hear S1 and then there's a gap, and then you hear it before S2 starts. So loud, normal, then a hard sound before the dub. That's a late systolic murmur. It's so hard to identify murmurs. So I feel like for your level, as long as you can identify S1 and S2 and a murmur, that's fine. You cannot, I don't expect you to tell me, no, it's mid-systolic. At best, maybe you can tell me it's pansystolic. So most cardio fellows would even have a hard time listening to murmurs. Okay? What's important is you know that there's a murmur. For diastolic murmurs, here, after you hear the murmur, you can clearly hear S1. But then after S2 and before S1, you hear a diastolic murmur. If it's after S2 before S1, it's mid-diastolic. And if it's before S1, immediately, that's late diastolic. So, paan lang? A key to this is just look at the pattern so you can identify. So, a continuous murmur is one that begins in systole and extends beyond diastole. So, that's a continuous murmur. Okay? We also have different shapes of a murmur. So, when you can hear a murmur that increase ang volume sa murmur, that's a crescendo. If it starts out strong and lowers down, that's decrescendo. If the shape is, it starts slow, then it peaks, and then tapers down, that's crescendo, decrescendo. However, if it's continuous all throughout, that's a plateau kind of murmur. Okay? So, if there's anything about murmurs, this one you have to remember. So, the grading of the murmur. If you can hear the murmur without using a stethoscope, that's immediately grade 6. Okay? If, for example, you can faintly hear a murmur, you have to really listen in, that's grade 1. If it's loud and palpable, so let's say you can hear the murmur and you can palpate the murmur, that's grade 4. Anything beyond or below that, that's the corresponding grade. So if there's anything, just remember grade 1, grade 4, and grade 6. And then in terms of the others, so the location, the radiation, the pitch, and the quality. So again, the location, what area can you hear it best? Where does it radiate? To the neck, to the back, to the mid-clavicular area sa left. So that's important. The pitch, you have to identify if it's high, medium, or low. And the quality, you just have to measure if it's blowing, it's harsh, it's rumbling, or it's musical. So that's how you describe the murmurs. Then this one, this is a very good to know na exam, for exam purposes. So study this one very well, okay? So based on the Valsalva maneuver, what will increase or decrease, what murmurs will increase or decrease based on when you do your Valsalva. So what I included, so that will be the end of the lecture, no?